So drums are like the skeleton of electronic music. They're the thing that holds the rhythm, they control the energy, and they also just establish the overall vibe of what our track is going to sound like. It's important to get them right, which is why I'm dedicating a whole video just to no genre in particular, no particular door, just simply 7 techniques for better drums. If you're looking for more of a deep dive into the world of drum programming, go head over to the EDMProd website and check out our Drums by Design course. The link is below for that one. So the first thing is sample selection. I thought I'd start here because this is like the root, the core of our drum programming. This is where it all starts, where it all stems from. So to really nail that sample selection, you want to have elements that sound like they belong together. So this will change depending on what style of track that you're going to make. For example, if you're wanting to make something like 90s hip hop, you're probably going to want a big kick drum. You're probably going to want a big snare drum and maybe some loose natural hi-hats. In this particular case, maybe going to some MPC samples will be a good option. If you're trying to make house, then maybe think about going to the 909 and seeing what sounds the 909 has. But whilst these genre guidelines are good, sometimes we don't always know what genre we're wanting to make. So just having sounds that fit together, that's the core ingredient here. So how do we get different sounds to feel like they belong together? Well, try and program your drums with a particular theme in mind. So have a listen to these different drum kits that I have just loaded up from the Ableton suite. And you can see how there's a lot of similarities between the individual drum hits within each kit. So this first one, have a listen here. That's a huge kick. And let's have a listen to this little snare here. You can hear that every element in this drum kit is huge. This is going to be some sort of track where the drums are providing a lot of energy and structure. So if we go over to this one, for example, though, this one is much more stripped back and minimalistic. Both of them are correct in their own context. It's just about finding the ones that work together and having a particular theme in mind. So with my drums that I have here, this is more of a house groove. So we have a nice thick kick drum with some weight behind it. And we have a classic 909 style open hi-hat. And then we have just some closed hi-hats that are just a little bit snappier and swung that are accenting this one as well. And that is the sound selection that I've started with on this house track. Those elements feel like they belong together. The next technique is layering, and this becomes important with sound selection. So we're selecting our sounds. I like these 4 sounds that I've got here. But in my opinion, the snare, I really like the vibe that it's giving to the track, but it doesn't really hit in that mid frequencies where I really want it to. It's sort of more high end, but doesn't have that body of the snare that I want. So I've got this other clap here that I want to layer with the snare that I already have. So I'm going to grab this wave file and just drag it into this instrument rack. And now when this MIDI note triggers, it's going to be playing both of the clap and the snare at the same time. That already sounds so much better. What I'm going to do in this case is just solo this clap that I put back in. I was originally going to shorten it, but I actually think it's quite short already, so I might just leave it as it is. And now we can A/B before and after. Now in this case, this clap and this snare, they work really well together because they are kind of separated in their frequency ranges, but be careful because you might need to EQ each one differently to get them fitting together properly. All right, so we can layer one shots on top of each other, but we can also layer in loops. And I think this is a good technique for learning producers that are still trying to figure out how to make their drums sound really professional. Layering in loops just for a bit of background interest will do wonders for your drums. So I've got this loop and it just sounds like this so far. It's a little bit repetitive. So if I am to just grab a loop like this, This is going to make just our hats feel a little bit different each time and add a little bit of variation in the loop in the background. So I'm just going to pull that in here and let's see how this goes. So things are layering on top of each other, but they're layering in a nice way where our hats feel a little bit different each time. And there's a few more percussion hits in the background that are accenting a nice groove that I like. So to recap, we can layer one shots. We can also layer loops into our drums for a little bit of extra interest. The next technique is all about subtle details and intricacies. These things will really help give depth to our drum loop. So I've got this little snare here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull it in and let's see where I'd want to place this. I'm just going to put this onto this last 16th note here. I'm maybe going to swing it a little bit as well. And then I'm going to delete these other ones and turn down the volume of this one and see how it goes. I'm also going to grab a reverb and put it on this. So this is going to help just push it back into the background and have it a little bit more like a background detail rather than an upfront snare. I'm going to duplicate this over to 2 bars later as well. And what I'm actually going to do here is actually grab this auto pan device and I'm panning it every 4 bars. So every time that this plays, this one is going to be over on the left side and then this one's going to be over on the right side. It's going to be panning to each side differently each time it hits. And this is going to add a little bit more subtle intricacy as well. But it doesn't stop there, of course. I've made another loop that is going to act as a sort of background texture element as well. And it's just this little perk here that sounds like this. It was just a hat loop that I chopped up and put some echo on. So experiment with different textural things that you can put in the background and have a listen to how this works. So now it's starting to add a lot more depth and detail to the loop. Another thing that I've done here as well is I've got this thing I called a groove loop, and that is another loop that I've chopped up and just EQ'd heavily to get this kind of feel. And it's these sort of intricacies that are important when we want a professional drum sound. So the next one is EQ, and whilst we do need EQ to clean up our loops, for example, this snare drum could do with some EQ, right? Because it's probably going to have some low end in there. There's all this low end down here that I can cut out and do this, which is all well and good, but we also want to shape each sound to fit the rest of the drum loop. And what I mean by that is if I play this, I've just went and grabbed a shaker loop, just dragged it straight from the browser into this session here. It sounds like this. And something like a shaker loop I hear all the time is actually very intrusive in this drum loop because we have a lot of high end in this shaker. It really sticks out of the drum loop. In this case, fixing this problem is something as simple as just pulling down a high shelf on the shaker just a little bit. So if I just A/B what I've just done, I'm still getting all the qualities that I want from the shaker, but that high end isn't so bright. Let's have a listen to that in the context. First, I'm going to play it without the EQ, and then I'm going to engage the EQ. See how taking the high end out of this shaker really just glues it into the loop rather than having it stand out. So if things are standing out and you think it's a frequency problem, then see if you can use EQ to fix that. It's also worth me touching on compression whilst I'm here. Now there's a few different ways which we can use compression in terms of a drum focused context. Maybe the first one would be if you have a loop and the transient's a little bit too harsh in the loop. So you just want to tame those transients. You can just go grab a compressor, set the ratio to whatever you like, maybe pull that back the attack so we can really hit those transients, and then pull down the threshold. Make sure the makeup gain is turned off. Now this is really important. Make sure the makeup gain is off, and then you can just pull down the threshold and you'll see that the peaks will be grabbed and reduced and tamed from this compressor. So if you want to just tame some peaks, a compressor is a good way of doing that. But I think the much more useful way of using a compressor in a drum focused context is by using a bus compressor. And I'll just show you how to set one of these up. So I'm just going to go grab a glue compressor in Ableton. This is just an emulation of an SSL hardware compressor. So that's why I'm using it in this case, because it has a little bit of character to it that I like. And I've just grabbed this glue compressor and just put it on my drum group. Or if you're in another DAW, you can route all your drums to a bus and then put it on the drums bus. I'm going to leave all the settings where they are and just pull down the threshold and have a listen. So what's happening is the kick is the loudest element in here, and that's engaging the compressor. And as the kick hits, it's compressing the whole drums group. So the hats are going to start ducking and pumping with the kick as well. And this really helps to give everything a more cohesive feel. A lot of the time when you do drums bus compressing, you actually have a little bit too much pumping and you want to tame that back a bit. So in this case, we'd need to use the internal EQ. So if I click this little sidechain toggle here, it shows you the internal EQ of this device. This EQ is just going to change what the compressor is listening to, not the output of the compressor. So if I go in here and hit the little headphone icon, and I can hear what the compressor is actually going to be triggered by, and I can take out some of the kick drum. So that's what it was being triggered by before. And if I pull this up, then it's going to be triggered by less of the kick drum and it's going to be pumping less. So I think that's around about a healthy amount. It's pumping a little bit, but not too much. So I can unclick this headphone icon now and hear the whole drum bus compression. So listen to how the kick drum is a lot tighter and the hat is pumping with a little bit more energy when this is engaged. When you do drum bus compression, you'll find that you actually lose a little bit of low end in the kick as well. So if this is the case, go grab an EQ and just boost the low end a little bit just to compensate after the EQ, and that will fix the problem. So the kick will still be tight, but you'll have a little bit more low end back in there. So our next technique is using a reverb on a send to give the drums a sense of space. So using a reverb on a send allows me to apply the reverb to multiple different hits and put them in the same room. So have a listen to this reverb. I've reduce the decay quite a bit, and it's a drum plate kind of reverb. So all of the drum elements that we send to this reverb are going to be put in this particular space, in this particular room, and that'll help just make it feel a little bit more natural to us. So we've got this hi-hat here and it's dry. And then once I send this into it, it's quite subtle, but you can see the difference there. So I'm just going to send some of my hi-hats and some of my elements into this drum space. So I'll just exaggerate the effect for a moment so you can hear the difference, and then I'll pull it back to where I would have it. So again, this is a very subtle thing, but it will just help your drums breathe and feel a little bit more natural in this context. And the last one we've already touched on already, but it's drum bus processing. So we talked about how you can use a compressor on a drum bus as we have here, but you can do all sorts of things on a drum bus. And one of my favorite things, as you can see here, is using a saturator on a drum bus just for a little bit more of a raw, authentic feel. So if we think about it, whatever you put on the drum bus, all of the drum elements are going to go through. So that's going to do a lot in terms of the cohesion of your drums to make it feel like one drum kit or one drum sound. So drum bus processing is super key and definitely worth mentioning if you're wanting to improve your drums. And you can experiment with a whole bunch of different things. So different variations of saturation. I personally love the Sound Toys bundle for things like drum bus processing. They have a bunch of different things like emulations of mixer amps like this one here. Or even you could try some subtle distortion. So something like this one is great if you use it in very small amounts. It's going to compress and distort the signal as well. And other things like exciters and erosion and different types of saturation and distortion, and even EQ as well. So I'm going to go grab an EQ and let's show you how you can use this on a drum bus. So you could try a scan around for different frequencies that you want to take out. And that just helps clean it up a little bit. Or you could even try using something like a mid-side mode, putting it onto your sides and even boosting some of the sides for a little bit more width in your drums. So that's just helping the clap feel a little bit wider. I'm also going to just cut out the low end of the sides as well. So now the instances of saturation and compression and EQ are really helping our drums feel much more cohesive as a group. So there you have it. Those are my 7 techniques. Let me know in the comments if there's any of your favorites that I've missed. If you've enjoyed the video today, remember to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Otherwise, thanks for making it to the end. Stay safe and I'll see you in the next one.